Hello.
Hello.
This entire episode shall be conducted with a British accent.
In British.
Yes, in British.
In the Queen's English.
Because
we will be...
a Queensy car in the background.
No, she would never be seen in something so gauche, so... what is... There's probably some British word that I'm looking for.
Which queen?
Did I recount about how I had an episode of Road Rage recently that I had to...
No, not called Road Rage.
Sorry, Thoroughfare Incensement that required a quick pivot.
No.
Somebody was taking a great deal of time to make a decision about whether to proceed or not, despite the fact that they had the right of way. And I said, "What are you waiting for? An invitation from the Queen?" And then I quickly realized that she is no longer with us. And I said, "Because you're not going to get one because she has expired." And I felt some guilt.
Did you scream this out the window, or is this like an internal?
I screamed it inside of the car. If the window had been open, I would have screamed it audibly.
You were probably in an old broken shit box where you couldn't open the window quickly enough to yell at them.
Yeah, but it required a bit of a pivot. Anyway, this episode of the Carmudgeon Show is, like many others, part of the Haggerty Podcast Network and is presented by Jason Cammisa and me, Derek Tam-Scott. We discuss British cars, particularly
baddy getaway cars.
naughty, crime British cars.
I mean, I feel like
this Jaguar Mark I, which I have purchased.
I think
recently.
the sort of idea of a getaway car is something that's just so ingrained in American culture. Like, we are allowed to have Hellcats and we are allowed to have really fast, like, first of all, our police officers all have large cannons with which they will shoot us. And that's just not the case in the US. So, the UK. So the UK's got this history of having cars that are just known to be driven by
ne'er-do-wells.
Bad people, baddies, bad guys.
Yeah.
And the one sitting in the background is just sinister shade of non-metallic, deep British racing green with dark metallic green, non-metallic green wire wheels, looking incredibly beautifully evil.
Yeah.
I love it.
It is perhaps the origin of that. Maybe the British viewers among us will be able to recount whether there were other before this bad guy cars. But this is certainly, in my mind, knowing what I do about Great Britain,
I think Cruella de Vil probably would have had this after the Dalmatians were gone.
Yeah.
I sort of think,
So we'll talk about the Jag Mark I, a bit of Jaguar's competition history, British car troubles, the relationship between motorsports and road cars.
And how this is really the new M3, the old M3. The M3 is the new Jaguar.
I prefer
or something.
I prefer the construction where this is the original M3.
Sure, that works.
Great. Okay.
You've heard it here first. Join us again next. Oh, we haven't even started yet, have we?
Oh, yes. I will do a clap.
I wish it wasn't real.
You and me both.
The commenters the last episode were really funny. Just tell Derek to cup the one hand, hit the other hand with that. Yeah. No, you cup one, and then use your fingers of the second cupped hand.
Okay. I will not do that.
It just doesn't matter. Okay, bye. Okay. You have a lot of coasters.
Yes, it's...
extra layers of protection here.
I'm increasing the hydraulic head of my water bottle. The gravitational potential energy.
Great. So when it spills, it'll then rock it all over.
Go farther. It'll have more kinetic energy when it spills because all that gravitational potential energy will
I'm going to take away some of them because I want to reduce the potential energy because there is a rust situation happening in there. Can you hear it? If we quiet down really quietly, I bet we can hear it rusting.
No, that's your Rover, which is
that's
outside.
rusting loudly outside.
This car is not terribly rusty.
Yes, but it's also not terribly galvanized.
It's definitely not galvanized, but nothing of this era is. Nothing, even very few cars from the 1970s even are galvanized.
Been invented yet, I'm guessing.
Porsche started galvanizing floor pans only in 1971.
Okay.
And then they did whole body shells starting in 77.
That's early.
Yeah, and Audi was quite early
Audi was
too.
The first to do the full lineup, I think. I feel that was a PX thing.
Mm-hmm. So when is that? The early 80s?
I don't, early 80s, yeah.
Okay.
Fully galvanized bodies.
Well,
and Mercedes did it in '84. I think they switched somewhere around there. Anyway,
that late, surprising actually. That's neither here nor there. This
Where is it?
Here.
If it's
in
neither
the
here
liminal space,
okay.
I guess.
That behind us is a Jagwire.
Oh God,
It's got wire wheels on it.
Oh yes,
So
it does.
that's the difference between Jaguar and Jagwire.
The Jaguars have wire wheels.
Yes,
the more you know.
Oh, here we go. That is not true. It's Well, we get a lot of shit in the comments about this, about our pronunciation of Jaguar.
Should we pronounce it coupe or
No.
not? So here is the simple rule.
Oh, here we go.
We're extremely consistent. People give us a hard time about this, but they say you're mispronouncing it. Like, why do you pronounce it Porsche versus, Porsche, but you say Jaguar instead of Jaguar. And I think the answer here that you all are looking for, I know very enthusiastically, is that the word Jaguar has two pronunciations depending on where you are. And they're both accepted as correct pronunciations.
The word, the improper noun, Jaguar, the cat.
Sure.
Is what you're talking about.
Yes. Yes. Or any number of other words like coupe versus coupe. Those are both acceptable pronunciations in the English language, depending on whether it's regionalized for the United States or for the Queen's English, Commonwealth countries. So both are acceptable. Porsche is a proper noun which has there's no equivalent. It doesn't appear in the English dictionary, I assume. And if it does, it should be pronounced Porsche as two syllables because it's a foreign word. So the question is it a foreign word or not? That, to me, is the litmus test about whether there's acceptability around multiple pronunciations.
This is a proper noun, but it is named after an improper noun, just a regular...
Very improper cat.
So, yeah. Same thing, we don't call it aluminium just because it was on a British car. It's aluminum. Yeah. That's what we call it.
Correct.
There is some... some of the comments I've gotten to me are like, and yet Cammisa mispronounces every single Japanese car company's name. And what I have to do is, at the end of the day, I defer to the car company itself, right? I mean, Hyundai is not how it's pronounced in Korean.
But it is how the company pronounces it in marketing materials in the
Hyundai,
United
like
States.
Sunday. That was literally, and of course they stupidly missed the whole idea of getting the Commodores to go saying easy like Hyundai morning. But I can't, if the company...
Oh, the Commodores. Yes.
If Lionel Richie, that is. So if the company says our name is Hyundai, I'm not going to correct them and say, no, you're Hyundai. No, okay, fine. Or Hyundai, I think is even more of it. Whatever it is. Same thing with Toyota, same thing with Honda, right? And Mazda has not done a campaign saying we are Matsuda.
Yeah.
Mazda, it's what they call it. So
it's regionalized for the country so that
you're in Canada.
And then it's Mazda.
Mazda.
Like pasta instead of pasta.
Yeah, what do they know?
It's just a regional difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, we
Jaguar.
are here to talk about the Jaguar.
You just did an extra syllable.
It was ironic.
Oh.
Subtitle.
Subtitle.
Irony in play, alert. Well, as the robotic people among us, of which I am one, you need really obvious signs when irony or sarcasm is happening. Yeah. Otherwise,
Otherwise, you're in trouble. Okay, so that behind us is a what year, make, model vehicle?
So this is a 1957 Jaguar.
It's 1957.
I was going to start with the history lesson, which is the car came out in 1955. It's a 1957 Jaguar Mark I. It was before the Mark II came out, so it was not called the Mark I at the time. It was retrospectively renamed or referred to as the Mark I, but it doesn't say Mark I anywhere on it or any of its materials.
It was just the Jagyoowuhr.
It was called the 2.4 or 3.4 liter Saloon officially, but you'd call it a Jag 3.4 or 2.4. Okay. So the car arrived initially as a... Do we start with history or should we contextualize?
I think
let's start with context. Mm-hmm. This is, I think, a contender for the world's first sports sedan.
Can I just say it is achingly beautiful?
I think so too. I'm biased as a geriatric person with Anglophile proclivities.
I have not driven one. I've never sat in one. Oh. I fully intend on doing burnouts after we record. In this car and donuts in the parking lot. However, it's gorgeous.
Yeah. And it was, like many Jaguar products, designed largely by Sir William Lyons, who is Mr. Jaguar.
He would be Mr. Jagyoowuhr.
Yes,
okay.
sure, fine.
By our own rules.
Who started the company in 1922 making sidecars for the Swallow Sidecar Company, which is called SS at the time, because prior to World War II, SS had no sort of unfortunate meaning, which it gained during the war.
Yeah, super sport. Camaro
yes,
SS.
sure. What is it? Storm. What does it stand for? SS.
We don't
Something in German.
Things.
Okay. Well, so they so the model they started referring to certain cars as Jaguars during the pre-war years, and then they changed the name of the company after the war. And Sir William Lyons had a really good aesthetic sense, and so he designed a lot of the cars. And he had just a very good sense generally. We've done a dedicated Jaguar episode.
The dead brand walking.
Dead brand walking. Yeah, in which I extolled the virtues of the old company that was Jaguar. But what you basically got was a world-class car at a very reasonable price, and it was beautiful to look at, and high performance was also part of the picture. It was just like a have your cake and eat it too type of car. And that was the thing that always made Jaguar special, including this one, and the sports cars and the big sedans also. So this was their first, up until this point, they had only made basically two different cars, a big sedan and a sports car, and this was their first small sedan. And it had sort of ingredients from their sports cars in it, and so when people started running them in touring car races and other competitive rallies and stuff like that, they were incredibly competitive at doing that, and so they became, I think, one of the world's first sports sedans. The other car you could argue maybe is the world's first sports sedan is what Alfa Romeo was doing at the same time, which was the Giulietta, which we always see as a coupe or a spider, designed by Bertone and Pininfarina respectively, but they had an in-house sedan, which there was a hot version of called the TI Turismo Internazionale, which is still used today, or was until the Giulia. Is the Giulia dead yet, the current Giulia?
No, just the QV.
Just the QV. Okay, so still used today, the Turismo Internazionale moniker, which is the hottest version of the sedan that you could get at the time. So that car came out around the same time as this one, maybe slightly later, actually. I think the Giulietta came out in 54 or 55 as the two-door, and then the sedan followed, and this car came out in 1955. So beginning of the sports sedan.
Beginning of the sports sedan, and the Alfa Romeos were that the sedan was effectively a sports car with a sedan body on it, correct? I mean, it's all the same sort of sports car-y type.
Yeah.
I mean, engine,
yeah, the engine,
suspension.
It was fundamentally shared, yes. And actually, on that subject, this car was more sophisticated. This car, the Mark I, was more sophisticated than the sports cars Jaguar was making at the time because it came out later. The sports car that was being produced at the time was the Jag XK, the 120 and 140. The 140 was just an update of the 120. And because this car was newer, it had like a coil spring front end, for example, which the sports cars did not have at the time. And unitary construction also, which the sports cars did not have. This was Jaguar's first unitary car as opposed to separate body on frame construction. So this was like everything they had learned in the ensuing 7 years since the XK120 came out applied to the next car they happened to make, which was a sedan. So in some ways, it's more technically sophisticated than the sports cars you could buy at the same time.
So more sophisticated suspension and chassis construction, but same engine.
Same engine. Well, the 2.4 as it came out for the first 2 years. The 3.4 didn't come out till 57. It was a 2.4 for the first 2 years. 2.4 only for the first 2 years. And the 2.4 was actually, if you conventionally read the displacement, it's actually 2.5 liters, and it was a de-stroked version of the 3.4 engine that was used in the sports cars and in the big sedan.
So
they were just trying to put, it's
right.
Still the dual overhead cam XK engine that was introduced in 1948 and used until the early 90s in the Daimler DS420 and the Jag XJ6 until 86. And so this was a very sophisticated engine by anyone's standards. It had hemispherical combustion chambers, dual overhead camshafts, which was really the big thing that was an innovation.
This is a time when a single overhead cam was a big deal.
Yeah, that is true.
Big deal.
Yeah, and so this was the small version was 2.5 liters. They de-stroked it because, as we've talked about with British cars of this era, the displacement tax or the taxation road tax was calculated on the basis of cylinder count, and
stroke.
bore.
Oh, bore. That's right.
Bore. And so the if you wanted displacement, then you were incentivized, if you wanted to sell a car, to get the displacement via stroke rather than via bore. And so all the British engines of this period are all low revving tractor engines. And that's one of those cases where you see a manifestation of regulations shaping the artifacts that come out of a particular country. Meanwhile, Alfa Romeo is making these tremendously over square, high revving engines that are displacing less than 2 liters because there's no incentive the structure like there is in England. So
but all the Italian stuff was under 2 liters.
Yes, it was all under 2 liters. So the Giulietta also, exactly. And so those were 1300 cc, 7,000 RPM in the Veloce engines at the same time, which was a very large number of RPM for that period.
Yeah. If you were making an engine for this car and trying to get tax advantageousnesses, wouldn't you have just debored this engine?
Well, it wasn't a tax thing. They were trying to get the displacement down while maintaining things as much as they could the same. And so they actually shortened the deck height, and the engine weighs, the 2.5 weighs 50 pounds less than the 3.4 because they wanted to make the engine less heighty. Tall, I guess, is the word we use in some places, such as this one and everywhere else where English is spoken.
Have we both not had enough caffeine? I mean, you're not a coffee drinker.
I don't drink caffeine, so
yes.
I
need a nap. Yeah,
insufficient caffeination. So the car came out with a 2.4 and it had 112 horsepower. It had Solex carburetors. It's the only Jaguar ever to use Solexes rather than SUs. Most British cars use SU carburetors. And everyone sort of, the British magazines all said, oh, this thing's quite zippy. I mean, when you compare it against what other things it was supposed to be competing against, like Vauxhalls and Fords and Citroën DSs and stuff like that, it was pretty good performance, but it had 112 horsepower and it's, it was fine and sort of compared favorably to other cars that made 100 horsepower, which was pretty typical then. And of course, the Americans were like, it could stand more power, but it's pretty zippy for a small sedan. But so then naturally the 3.4 was added, especially for the American market, where Jaguar was doing. This was all during the export or die era of Jaguar, or of Britain rather, where they were really incentivizing getting. Britain had no money, period, because they'd spent it all during the war, and so they were really strongly favoring whatever you can make British industry, please make it such that it is exportable so we can sell it to other people so we can get some money into this country. And so there was a strong emphasis on that. And you see it certainly in cars. I'm sure it was present in other things, but I don't know as much about those subjects. But yeah, you see it in Land Rovers and all of these cars that were sold, especially in the United States and somewhat in continental Europe, but less in continental Europe because those guys also didn't have a whole lot of extra money to be spending on frivolous things like automobiles when they were sort of picking up the pieces still. So the American market was very important to Jaguar, and the XK was a big part of that, and the Mark I was sort of altered in order to improve its appeal in the United States. And a fair number of these cars were sold in the United States.
Is this a U.S. market car?
This is a U.S. market car, yeah. I think it was on the mid-Atlantic coast. I learned that it was originally white with a red interior. Which is kind of charming and very period. This particular car, so I guess I'll transition into motorsport a bit.
Yeah, please do. But can I just say that part of what I love about the way these cars look is that they're sinister.
Yes.
There's something very sort of classic, cartoonish sinister about them. And white?
No, it's benign. It's just friendly and marshmallowy and non-threatening.
I just think this car is lurking in the background, plotting our death right now.
For sure.
But in the most elegant possible way.
It's interesting that you read this car that way because I think a lot of American consumers, especially younger ones, will read this shape as sort of Baroque and elegant and distinguished and sort of non-threatening for that reason. For that generation, threatening would be an all-black Countach. Or some kind of supercar shaped thing that's very, or maybe it's a Russian mafia Mercedes from the 90s, an S-Class with tinted windows. All of
those things for sure.
This was I would say, the equivalent of an S-Class with black tinted windows. I
think that's a perfect transition to get us probably to motorsport. But let's think about this. One of the first cars that the Brits all thought baddies would drive, right?
Yes,
if you wanted
this
to
car.
rob a bank,
Yes, you drove a Jag Mark II or
because
Mark 1.
The cops couldn't keep up with it.
Yes.
In the same way that a Lotus Carlton, similar color, 40 years later, was so fast that the cops couldn't keep up with it, so everyone used them for smash and grabs.
And critically also 4 doors and stuff to carry all the shit you've just stolen. Space to carry all the shit you've just stolen. So that was kind of, this car earned itself a reputation as being very naughty, but I don't know that it has that in the American mindset. It's interesting when I post on my stories content of this car. There's a quantity of people who chime in with it being very sinister or ask me if I'm on my way to rob a bank or do other hooliganry, and then a lot of other people are like, "You look like an old man" or whatever.
That's all of those things.
Can be.
I mean, old men don't rob banks. Don't be ridiculous. That's ageist.
I'm sure there's a movie there.
I think it's probably
with Alan Arkin and Morgan Freeman, and I'm casting some movie where there's a bunch of old men who are bad guys. Yes,
but I just think it's probably like the cartoons that we watched or that I watched as a kid that made that shape. So what it is incredibly elegant. It's just incredibly simple and elegant, and all of the adornment is in the front. It's all very, very clean, and so I do think it's elegant and old man and Baroque, but it's also just the type of car that the bad guy in the cartoon would choose.
Yeah.
And you can imagine it sort of rearing up on its,
yes,
bending in the wheelbase and then right after someone.
It certainly was used for that purpose. Because it was fast. And the police also used them eventually in the United Kingdom as well.
No guns, they need fast cars.
And the racing drivers would use them too. And so, especially, even in 2.4 liter form, which is actually 2.5, and especially in 3.4 liter form starting in 1957. And so they would run, in those days, this car is loosely a replica of a configuration that was it was driven by a guy named Mike Hawthorne. He's the first British F1 champion. He won the F1 championship in 1958, I believe. And he was driving for Ferrari. But that in those days, if you were an F1 driver, there were Formula One weekends, and if there were other weekends that you weren't racing an F1 car, it didn't pay the way it does now. You'd take a drive in whatever you could get, and so he worked with Jaguar, and he'd driven at Le Mans for Jaguar, because of course it should be added that Jaguar won Le Mans more times than anybody else in the 1950s. They won in, I think, 5 years in the 1950s, 57, 55, 51, 53, and probably 56 also. Not in that order, obviously.
It's a very strange way to count years.
I'm not very good at counting. So he drove for Jaguar at Le Mans, and so he drove Jaguar touring cars, including a car that looked like this, which is to say it was dark green with a green interior with the color-coded wire wheels. And normally these cars, if they had steel wheels, the early ones had spats that covered the entire rear wheel, and it makes the car look very old-fashioned. And then the wire wheel cars, there's a little cutout for the spinner, and then this car has a big cutout, which was sort of the hot rod setup. So these are the pared down spinners, and then they did a bunch of performance upgrades, and it was the car in which he was ultimately killed. He was racing a 300 SL Gullwing on a public road, driven by Rob Walker in January of 1959, I think it was. It was either 58 or 59. He had just won the F1 championship in, whenever that happens at the end of the year. And then a couple months later, he announced a retirement from motor racing. And then he was killed a few weeks later, basically driving a car that looked very much like this, but was right-hand drive. But he drove it to win at Silverstone in the previous summer. And there was just a whole field of these cars and various other touring cars, but these were unstoppable, basically unbeatable, were the Jag Mark 1 3.4s in saloon car racing during that period. Wire wheels were optional, as were starting in 57 disc brakes. Mm-hmm. So very early use of disc brakes, especially in a sedan. The Citroen DS had front disc brakes starting in 55.
And this was all four.
This was all four disc brakes, because Jaguar started using disc brakes at Le Mans, I think, in 53 or 52.
That's a pretty quick transition from Formula One. I mean, think
Le
about
Mans.
this. Fair point. But
world class motorsports.
Motorsport to trickle down to
family
saloon
cars.
car.
Yes.
In a couple of years. It's
Yes.
pretty amazing.
It was a sign. This was indicative of the stuff that the magic that represented Jaguar at this time. Same thing with the E-Type. I mean, I've said this many times, with the level of sophistication of that car, there was no car that had the spec list that car had at any price made by anybody. And the cars were just dirt cheap for what they offered. These, same thing. You read the period road test, everyone's like, these things are so cheap for what they offer in terms of performance.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a modern equivalent of something like this. So a really well-built car that...
that was probably the thing they were the worst at.
Okay. A beautifully...
Very luxurious and
luxuriously
well-styled.
appointed car
Yes.
with an actual racing engine.
Yes.
Racing...
That had one Le Mans, quite literally the same year this car was built, 1957.
With that same engine.
Yes.
Right? So a Le Mans winning engine, disc brakes that came straight from racing, all of this pedigree, and
with like a beautiful leather interior with wood dashboard, and there's wood around the window frames and all that shit.
At half the price of Mercedes?
Yeah, I mean, so the E-Type cost a third as much as a Ferrari 250 when it came in 1961, and it was less than a Porsche 356, the spiciest of which had 90 horsepower. It should be added. Yeah. The normal was 60, the Super was 75 horsepower, and the Super 90 was 90 horsepower. Yeah. So, I mean, and the Jag was quoted at that time at 265 horsepower. Those are admittedly optimistic horsepower. This car, so the 2.4 was 112 horsepower, the 3.4 was 210 horsepower, and its top speed was in excess of 120 miles an hour. I think it was 121 or 23 miles an hour, depending who was testing and which way the wind was blowing, and did 0 to 60 in 9 seconds.
That's nuts.
In 1957.
Nuts for the day.
Yeah. I mean, those were numbers that in the 80s were still sort of quite respectable.
Absolutely.
Like if you watch an old John Davis Motor Week
We're
thing,
glad to have you with us.
He's like, oh, it did 0 to 60 in 9.4 seconds. Quite good for a family car.
Right.
Literally 30 years prior, this car was doing that. And so it really was an outlier in terms of performance. And so this one is, like I said, an early car. It's a Mark I. There's not very many Mark Is in the United States that have survived. Most people associate this shape with a Mark II, which was just an improved version of this car. Probably the easiest way to tell is the size of the windows and the surrounds of the windows. Mark IIs have much bigger windows, all windscreens and the side windows, and they have chrome window frames, which most people think are more aesthetically pleasing. And the reason why they did this is because it was their first unitary car. They were concerned the chassis would not be strong enough if they put too many holes in it that were too large. So they made the windows really unnecessarily small because they were like, ooh, unitary construction, this newfangled business. I don't know if we can... be sure this is going to work. So the later cars have larger windows. I'm very partial to the Mark I, but almost everybody else prefers the Mark II.
Which are the ones that we typically see racing?
It's a mix. At Goodwood, right? Sliding around sideways, you'll see them both doing it.
We've talked about this before, but I think that's one of the most pornographic.
Yes, sounds and sights.
Sounds and sights in all of motoring.
Yes, I completely agree. And I was inspired to buy this car by going to Goodwood last year and seeing these cars circulating. This configuration is exactly the configuration I wanted, and it was like what I was specifically looking for. And because Mike Hawthorne's looked like this, it's relatively easy to find one in the UK that's done up like this in dark green with dark green wheels. And sometimes they have, a tan interior instead of green, but I wanted, the green, which is what his car had. And I think just green interiors are cool generally.
Wild, yeah.
And so you can find them in the UK because that history and heritage is sort of appreciated, and still sort of the torch is carried on by events like the Goodwood Revival and sort of various types of saloon car racing, which still exists. But less of a thing in the United States. It's a more obscure car. And most American cars tended, instead of getting painted wires, we almost always got chrome wires instead. And that was true of the sports cars as well. It was just America's more blingy. And so we got white wall tires often and chrome wires. So finding one with painted wires here in this color is a little bit difficult. And I felt very strongly, and I wanted a left-hand drive car for U.S. consumption. So this car turned up for sale in like 2022. And I really liked it, but I just didn't bid on it. I think I was like, I don't have any space or money to buy this thing right now. And then I regretted not buying it, especially after going to Goodwood last year and seeing them all over the place and being like, well, if that car ever turns up again. So anyway, I found this car, the same car that was on Bringer Trailer in 2022, and I said, I have to buy this thing, especially because they're just not worth that much money. And so most of the time they don't get restored to a high level, and this car is pretty well restored or thoroughly restored. And so it's in the US, no import needed, left-hand drive in the configuration I wanted, so I had to buy it.
What is the price range for something like this?
The best, so Mark IIs are worth more than Mark Is, and there was this big movement in the 90s as the guys who grew up dreaming about Mark Is got some money, and these are boomer age people or maybe even slightly older, and that was the run-up of cars that are made during the 60s of values of stuff like E-Types and 275s and Corvette Stingrays and whatever else really exploded in value in the sort of 90s, 2000s. And so a lot of guys started upgrading these cars and putting 5-speeds in them and aluminum radiators, doing a rack and pinion steering conversion with power assist. And there was even a couple of outfits that would basically keep the aesthetics and then put modern Jag guts in. So you would get the X308 supercharged V8 4-liter with 370 horsepower with a transmission to go with it. And then they do a rear end swap, because these are live rear ends with a cantilevered spring design. If you look underneath the car, you'll be like, the leaf springs are installed upside down, and the one end of the leaf spring attaches to the rear axle. The end. Normally the rear, so normally a leaf spring has a sort of semi-elliptical shape, if you will, which is what the precise terminology.
Leaf springs, yes.
So, and one end attaches, somewhere near the back bumper, and then the other end attaches under the car, and then the axle goes in the lowest part, which is the middle. This is inverted first, so instead of being bowed down, it bows up, and then the trailing end of the leaf spring attaches to the rear axle, and the leading edge attaches to like a pocket under the floor, under the back seats, and then the middle of it is also attached to the chassis of the car. So it's a cantilevered spring.
So if the middle is attached to the car, the highest point is attached to the car.
Yes.
Are you actually using the whole spring, or you are only using the half? Because I'm guessing
there's so there is a link, I should say, there.
Oh dear.
Yes, it's quite extraordinary.
Oh dear. The Brits do very extraordinary things, don't they?
But I would say, like the Rover SD1, it actually rides very nicely. Yeah.
Hey, solid axles can do great things.
Yeah.
And
you look at you watch them go around Goodwood, and you will be very convinced of that ability.
Although maybe they're sideways all the time because of the rather unsophisticatedness of the rear suspension. Or just because
the amusement factor. Yeah. So yes, it has a weird. Anyway, I went down this. So they do independent rear suspension conversions when they were doing the XJR upgrades and put power windows and power seats and all this crazy shit in them. Yeah, this was popular back then, and sometimes those turn up and they can sell like for above $100,000. I'd say the best sort of 3.8 liter Mark II. So the Mark II was available not just at the 2.4, the 3.4, but also the 3.8, which was not available ever in the Mark I. The best, and you want a manual overdrive car, because there was a lot of permutations. You could get automatics, which is a 3-speed Borg Warner, which probably sends its commands via telex or telegraph. And so you don't want an automatic. A lot of them got swapped, justifiably so. So you want a 4-speed with overdrive, 3.8. Mark II is the sort of holy grail, most valuable configuration for one of these cars. And those, if it's not modified or altered in any ways, maybe a $75,000 car.
And on the other end, like a 2.4.
And a 2.4 Mark I, you could buy one for, that's rusty and like functional for $10,000. And, the best Mark I in the world is probably $50,000 or $60,000. And a very good 3.4 liter Mark I is 30 or so.
That's a hell of a visual statement for,
and experience
10 to 30.
Also, I think.
That yet.
Well, just in terms of vintage car experience, and these I prefer the early cars for a number of reasons. The gauges are all in the middle on the Mark I. They move them in front of the driver. Sure. Exactly like a Prius.
Or a Z8.
Yes, there you go.
Or
Thank
Tesla.
you. Or any sort of number of pre-war Alfa Romeos and all that stuff. So I like the gauges in the middle of the car, and then directly in front of the driver is a glove box without a lid, and then in front of the passenger is a glove box with a lid for some reason, and it's got this huge 4-spoke, metal steering wheel, which is quite charming. So I prefer the Mark I for the interior and the form factor and the smaller lights. It's a little bit more delicate, except for the window frames, which are very much not delicate. They're very bulky. On the Mark I, they're very bulky. The pillars.
Oh, so the pillars actually, well, I guess the pillars would have gotten smaller if the openings got bigger.
The openings got bigger and they chrome trim, so it just sort of visually removes some of that sort of massiness. It's almost like a shape that they hollowed out to make the car, as opposed to a greenhouse sitting on top of another form.
What big mechanical upgrades for Series 2?
They widened the rear track by some like 2 or 3 inches between the Mark I and the Mark II. That's probably the biggest upgrade, and then the availability of the 3.8. There were sort of progressive changes over the years. They added a synchromesh first gear at some point, probably 65, I think. But the rear axle is probably the single most important technical change that they made to the car, was widening the track, which probably undoubtedly improves handling. And you can retrofit the Mark.
Or reduces oversteer, which I would say
is a minus.
It's not an improvement.
You can retrofit the Mark II rear axle. There's a lot of sort of aftermarket support for these cars generally, because they are numerous and they built them in large numbers, and they're used for competition. And so there's an appetite to upgrade stuff for these cars, and so you can do all kinds of hot rodding to them. You can do a triple carburetor conversion. You can upgrade the brakes and stuff. This one has upgraded brakes, and it has discs, which was good. I mean,
this was originally equipped with this?
This is I assume so, because it was a US 3.4. They were optional initially and then standardized later on, and everyone sort of universally concluded that if you got the 3.4, you needed disc brakes.
Yeah, it's a car that does 0 to 60 in 9 seconds.
Yeah, in 1957, which was kind of about that was Porsche territory back then.
Even though Porsches were only 90 horsepower?
Correct, because Porsches were 90 horsepower at the time. So yeah, I mean, it was a really, I think, remarkable performance car, and it was Jaguar's first small car, as I said. What other technical content was there in these cars? I think it's very much centered around the powertrain and the price. I mean, it was, I think, £1,600 for one of these cars. That was a lot of money back then. The E-Type was £2,000, but it was £6,000, which was house money for a Ferrari 250 at this time.
So this one is 4-speed manual.
It is now a 5-speed. It was originally a 4-speed with overdrive, which is the most desirable.
4 with overdrive, meaning 4 plus a fifth?
Yeah, it's a 4-speed, and then there's an overdrive switch, and then it engages overdrive thereafter, which is functional on either 3rd and 4th, or maybe it's just 4th. So it gives you a 5th ratio. And thoughtfully, Jaguar would give you a shorter final drive if you got a car with overdrive, which,
the best of both worlds, right?
Sense.
Shorter gears.
Yes, shorter gears, and then you can just engage your long cruising gear if you need. But if the overdrive fails, then you are less happy. And these are very torquey engines. I mean, they make really good pulling power from down low, and so you don't really have to rev them out. I don't think it probably revs to 5,500 or something like that in street trim.
Which is still not bad for the era, especially when you compare it to American V8s at the time that could barely make it to 4,000 often.
Correct. But yeah, everyone commented on how well the car handled, how well it braked, how well it accelerated, how well it just did everything. And, the idea of this car as a sort of car that, might outperform the Jaguar sports car, and certainly lesser sports cars, being in the family, but also be a family car, I think was really groundbreaking. And it just paved the way for an entirely new genre of cars, which we now very much enjoy, especially because the car could handle. Right. There was certainly a history of putting big engines in sedans, which Americans were very keen to do, and Mercedes did it with the 6.3.
Not
15.
yet, though, right?
Yeah.
Many years later.
Yeah, a dozen years after this car came out.
But right, that wasn't a cohesive sedan.
Yeah.
I think you're right in saying this was the first sports sedan. I mean, this really was the M3 of its era. If you think about and it didn't have a bucktooth grill. But
Shane, it's got this big. It's toothy nonetheless.
It's toothy nonetheless. But no, I mean the idea that you would have a family sedan that can keep up with sports cars, and that was priced below. That's maybe where the M3 of today falls apart a little bit. Priced dramatically below its performance capabilities. It's not a bargain anymore.
Yes, and I mean I don't know. Do you think maybe it's Tesla that does performance that is disproportionate to the cost of the car today?
Good question. I mean, Tesla has, let's just be very clear about something. We are talking about Tesla, the car company, and not its political
implications.
Implications here. Tesla as a company and its engineers have completely redefined how to engineer an automobile, and have moved the bar further than any other car company in our lifetime. There is little doubt in my mind that the Model 3 is the best sedan in the world, and the Y one, I haven't driven the new one yet, will be the best overall vehicle in the world. And it's a pretty difficult thing to say right now because I'm well aware that people are very upset, or very large fans of, one way or another. If you're buying a Tesla, you are putting that outfit on and you're making a political statement one way or another, and that's very difficult to divorce. But that is the best sedan in the world, but I don't think it has any marketing chops. I think it's just, that is a focus on taking a car that is effectively a commodity product and then refining all of the rough edges on everyone else's cars and making what is effectively a better consumer product for the masses. I'm not sure that's the same way.
No, not at all. I'd say the core innovation that this car brought was the fact that you could do that in a car with 4 doors and have it be a family car. It's a sort of well-rounded one-car solution type of vehicle.
Yeah, and I still think M3 wins there. Right. I mean, yes, Tesla's offer performance far greater than their MSRP would suggest, but I don't think. I
think that the other thing that this car does is it highlights a divergence which has occurred over. I would say it started in the 1960s, and it's still very much true now, about the divergence between like world-class motorsports and like everyday cars. And there is one of the reasons why the 250 GTO is among the most valuable cars in the world is because it is a car that you can still drive on the street. And now motorsports, I mean, you experienced this when you did the drag race with the Le Mans Cadillac. There is nothing about that car that would make it functional as a car for the average person.
It's not a car, right? It's a race car, which has become such a very different thing.
Yes, and this car is from the era where it was legitimately possible to make a statement like this engine won Le Mans this year, and I am now driving down to the shops in it. You know, that was a different era, and cars like the D-Type, which was the car that they won Le Mans with in 55 and 50, probably 6, and definitely 57, is a car that you can drive on the weekend. I mean, you could, as a car collector with deep pockets, you could have that in your garage. You could say, I'm going to take this down. And
I'm going to take the Formula One car out today, effectively.
Or the Le Mans winner, and go do this with this car and have that direct relationship between motorsports technology and the car you drive every day. Like, the link is incredibly intimate in a way that just isn't feasible anymore because race cars have become so specialized and because we've pushed the envelope on technical possibility so much, since you think about what a Le Mans winning car looked like in 1970. It's a 240 mile an hour tube frame car. That's not something you could drive it on the street, but you wouldn't. And in the 50s, that was true, and into the sort of 60s, I would say, right until, when did that change happen? Is it the GT40? There were street versions of the GT40,
right?
But not of the 917. So it happened in the second half of the 60s, I guess, is when that.
And then I think we had a little bit of a resurgence, a little bit of rebirth with touring car in the touring car championships, all the European,
well,
British, and German.
That's a different category of car. Then
they've far lesser,
yes.
sort of in the
yes.
echelon of racing, but we still did. You could buy an E30 M3.
Yes.
You could buy a 190 Cosworth. You could buy a Sierra RS Cosworth.
Yeah.
And these are all cars. Rover SD1. I mean, these are cars that did actually go out and win real races,
yes.
but they were not winning.
But they were not Le Mans.
I guess Porsche would be the closest, although Porsche's 911 today. I mean, 911.
Yeah, they have a new class, though, that they're specifically oriented towards a car that is based on a production car.
Yeah, but isn't the RSR mid-engined anyway? I mean, I don't know much about Le Mans racing, but I'm pretty sure Porsche campaigns the 911 RSR, which is with the engine moved to the middle of the car, which is decidedly not what a 911 is for the road.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that made the McLaren F1 so extraordinary. It was kind of the last time that happened, 1995, when they won the Ueno car, which is particularly hilarious because that car was engineered to be a road car, and then they decided to competition prepare it and then win them all. If you just want to understand how absolutely badass McLaren F1 is, I think that is a really good
Has any other car done that?
Well, I mean, back in the old days, everything was derived from a road car. The MK120-C, which was the C-Type, the first car that won Le Mans in 1950 for Jaguar in 1951. The car was developed as the XK120, as a sports car that they didn't even intend to manufacture and sell to the public. And then they took them to Le Mans, and they were, surprisingly competitive in standard form. And they said, what if we put an aerodynamic body on this thing? And then they were like, holy shit. And they just cleaned everybody's clock in 1951. So, this is that is the origin or the beginning. But prior to that, they were always sort of just like street-derived cars. And the transition between C-Type and D-Type, which is, happens in 1954, basically, is the D-Type is the first dedicated competition car from the ground up, as opposed to the C-Type being derived from a road car. And so Jaguar and everybody else presumably was sort of starting that process in the 1950s.
I mean, the link at that point between the road cars and the race cars was so tight. Think, Mercedes Gullwing. That was 100% a race car, had no intention to be sold to the public. And now it is one of the most amazing road cars of all time.
Yeah. And there have been a precious few number of those cars where that has happened. The Lancia Stratos, effectively, is that car. But it doesn't happen too often.
Cool. Well, I congratulate you.
Thank you. This was There are cars that I have historically not allowed myself to buy because I knew they were suicidal from a financial standpoint, and this is one of them. Where I'm buying it not because I would love to buy cars exclusively with the mind towards it's a car that I want, as opposed to like, what else could I buy for this money that might perform better as in terms of appreciation. Like there have certainly been times in the past where I bought, say, a Mercedes 500e because I felt like there was potential where its value could go up instead of buying something like this. Or, I have talked at length about how I would like a Ford Galaxy. I haven't bought a Galaxy yet because I just don't. Everything else that I want to own that costs the same thing, from the 80s or 90s, I think will slip out of reach if I don't buy one now. And so I have to buy certain cars that I think might go up because the public cares, and so that's one of the reasons why I haven't owned that many cars from the older period like this, even though I want to. It's hard to rationalize doing when I know I could spend the same number of dollars on some other car. But every so often I do it.
That will then become unattainable.
That will then become slip. Yeah, it'll slip out of reach.
Whereas these cars tend to be slipping.
Yeah, they're slipping in
reach.
values. Yes, they are. Anything British with wire wheels is basically becoming increasingly affordable. And this car I think is worth less than it was certainly 5 years ago. I think
certainly inflation adjusted, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And it's happened more with E-types, and I think. I hope that there will be more people who will consider buying old British cars as they slip into reach, and the car that you might, the 80s or 90s car that you might actually want, it slips out of reach. Then you might consider like, I can have an a big Healy for $40,000-$50,000 because E30 M3s are $90,000 now. for example. I mean, I can't imagine someone would actually do that, but it's part of my calculus is these cars that I like that, call it 20 years ago when a 911 SC was $12,000 or $15,000 and an E-Type was $80,000. I would be like, well, I think I might, I would love to have an E-Type, but when a 911 SC costs $15,000, I'm going to buy that because, or a 72 911 is, also $80,000, or a 356 is $60,000, or so it just
for a fraction of that. Why wouldn't you have the SC?
Yes, right? It's the same. And to make a comparison to now, it's like okay, E36 or E46 M3s. If you buy a well-maintained miler, it's $15,000 or $20,000, and you say, well, yeah, why would I buy an E30 M3 for $90,000 when I can buy an E36 M3 for $17,000? That's in better condition, not better condition. $90,000, which should get you a very nice E30 M3, but it's literally a fraction of the money, and so that calculus was happening for me around cars from the 50s and 60s, 20 or 15 years ago, and that's the reason why But now they're slipping into reach, and so it starts to become potentially.
So what you're saying
feasible.
Is you're going to become an even older man with older
that's right.
cars.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on. Part of it also is having a business where I deal with collector cars all the time. I can sort of divorce the feeling that I need to make money on my personal cars, which was always sort of like a ideal goal that I would factor into my decision making. Now that I'm making money on cars, from my business, I can sort of do dumb, irresponsible stuff with my personal cars instead.
I mean, dumb, irresponsible stuff. I would argue that buying that versus a Honda Civic, which were effectively the same price. No, I don't want to use the term no matter what happens to that car, but in all likelihood, your total cost of ownership of that for over the next 3 years.
It depends what breaks.
You buy a $38,000, I don't know what you paid for the car, it doesn't matter. You pay a $38,000 Civic. It's going to be worth 20, what's residual? 58% of that will be what's factored into the lease. You've lost 60% of almost 40 grand. I mean, at the end of the day, you've lost $20-something thousand.
Yeah, $20,000 will go a long way towards keeping that on the road.
Electrical repairs. I mean, was this pre-British electrical disasters?
No, it probably delivers on all that stuff. It's actually been fun to tinker. I've taught myself how to at least get the carburetors to a happier state, and I'm improving things. I've found the correct horns for it, which sound suitably dignified. So I'm just sort of enjoying tinkering with it. I would like to, if they'll have me, take it on something like the California Melee or something like that. Although maybe everyone will hide all of their valuables if I'm there
Probably
in that car.
You can't be trusted anyway.
But it is 1957, so it's technically eligible. But they kind of want sports cars there, so.
Well, I think you've given a reasonable
defense
that it's actually a sports car with a saloon body on it.
Yeah.
Also, it's just incredibly gorgeous.
Yeah,
so.
I'm very delighted with this car. I haven't enjoyed a car that I've bought recently like that in my honeymoon period. I haven't enjoyed with a new car so much in recent memory.
It's because you keep buying Jagwire or Mercedes.
I know. There's just a lack of novelty.
Yeah.
The Citroen delivered some of that, but then it sort of broke shortly after I bought it and was out of commission for some months. So that abruptly and decisively terminated the honeymoon period. But yeah, just like within the first 48 hours, I was like, I'm so glad I bought this car. I absolutely adore it. It was like a guilty thing that I didn't want to let myself do, but the exact car that I wanted turned up. And so I was like, okay, I have to buy this. And I feel a lot of joy and gratification from this particular purchase.
That's what's supposed to happen from classic car ownership.
Yes.
Period. So
I'm sure it won't be without trouble, but
whatever. What that's worth it is without trouble in the car world. I mean,
people who love and enjoy their sort of low maintenance 90s Japanese cars. Like NSXs and Supras.
They still have problems. That's the crazy thing. I made a post. A friend of both of ours has just recently become another British car fan. So now I have British cars, you have British cars, and he has
You have British car.
I have British car. Raw. And he has 2 Range Rovers, a P38 and an L322. And as L322, he was looking for a license plate on this. This is GG, who we've talked about in the past. And he was coming up with a license plate for it. And
he was trying to come
up with a license plate for the car. And I was in one of my slap happy creative moods writing a script. And I just started sending him plate after plate after plate after plate. It was one of these text message threads where I sent him like 40 screen grabs of wildly inappropriate but hilarious plates, and then one of them that I sent him was need AAA, and he burst out laughing and ordered it, and then forgot he had ordered it because it takes forever to get the plates. Plates showed up like last week, and he put it on the car, and I had such a laugh when I saw that, and he made it 4 blocks, and the car died on him, and not only just died on him, he was in the middle of a street. It was street cleaning day, and so the cars on the right were all trying to get out of their parking spots. He was going up the hill, and he was in the middle of the road,
up the hill.
And it just shut off. Like, I mean, this is not that old of a car.
Yeah.
Also, I should point out, he bought the car for like something like $10,000 or $11,000, and has $30-something thousand worth of receipts for the car over the last
from the previous
2
owner
years.
Or from his ownership, both
Combined. And so this car should be relatively sorted and free of maintenance. Car dies in the middle of the street. So of course the parking Nazis are coming to like get to tow all the cars away because street cleaning stopped. And he's like, can't ticket me. I'm not parked. I'm broken down and I'm in the middle of the road blocking traffic in both directions. But it wouldn't even respond. Like he'd hit the key and it would just not respond. Didn't crank, didn't anything. There were jumper
so
blocks
it could
on
not be put in neutral.
Couldn't do anything. He finally figured out a way to get it in neutral and backed the car down into a driveway until the tow truck should come. And of course, there's this hilarious video of his car with need AAA license plates on being put on a tow truck. I live for this shit, but I kind of feel bad for him.
Trust that he was not living for this shit at the time.
I mean, he did find it funny enough that he made all kinds of posts to it. I mean, like, it is what it is. But
the complexity does scare me in that era.
I mean, I don't think I have the stomach to own a more modern British car.
Yeah.
Parts prices and, in this case.
Yeah, and the lack of ability to do things yourself. Like, I have been impressed with this car that all of the sort of niggles that I've identified, I've been sort of able to intuit my way through figuring out what it was. Like the brakes weren't releasing, and it's like, okay, what could it be? It's like brake booster or the check valve that supplies the reserve for the brake boost after the engine's off, or you can sort of, and fiddling with carburetors and sort of various things. It's been sort of, there's a very finite menu of things that could possibly be failing, and that's not true, I think, in modern cars, and that's what scares me about them.
I mean, even the shop that took his Range Rover replaced. So what it turned out is the fuse that is on the engine electronics blew, and they were trying to figure out what it was. And it's one of a bunch of different things. These cars have voltage spike issues because the way the alternators go is they throw too many volts at everything. So they measured alternator output; it was fine. And then all of the things that are on that one circuit. There's like a coolant after run pump and a fuel pump that are on that circuit, and they tested both of those and everything seemed fine. And then the mechanic finally was like, well, we replaced a bunch of things and we've looked everywhere and we think it's probably just an anomaly, and took it for a drive and died and had to leave it on the side of the road overnight because he couldn't get a tow truck and it was blocking. I mean, it was just...
He didn't bring the fuse in question?
No, because now it's immediately blowing.
Okay, well, that's good. That's progress.
That's exactly. So now you can start unplugging different things.
Yes.
Everything was unplugged and it's still blowing. So it appears to be that it's a harness issue. And it's only shorting out direct to ground while the car's facing up a hill because it broke down on a hill again for them. And British car. It is what it is. It is what it is. It's part of the hobby.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
could be worse.
This is much less complex. I think the next frontier is suspension upgrades. Mm-hmm. I would really like to get this thing handling in a way where I can start hustling it. It feels archaic right now, and I would like to just sort of upgrade it. So
I just want to see it sliding around corners the way we watch at Goodwood.
Yeah, I don't. It has 4 turns lock to lock, so it's not fast enough steering to. And I'm very curious to know how all the race cars are set up because those guys are definitely using opposite lock. And I don't know if they probably can't do rack conversions and still have them be legitimate for FIA competition. Anyway, I'm curious.
My guess is that old tire technology plus a really long wheelbase like that and a solid axle means everything moves around very slowly. And as long as you have enough physical room in the cabin to be able to just turn the wheel 90 or 120 or 270 degrees in one, within a split second. Let's take it out in the parking lot. We'll find out.
Let's get it wet first.
Okay. All right.
Skid pan.
Well, congratulations on your new car.
Thank you.
I think it's beautiful.
I encourage everyone to drive by weird old cars, independent. It feels very profligate, but I got so much joy out of this that I do encourage everybody to do something similar.
Cool. Same. And don't call us when it breaks.
Certainly not. We'll be busy dealing with ours.
Yeah, our home broken stuff. Okay, join us again next week.
See you next
week.
week.
This has been the Carmudgeon Show, and probably will continue to be.
Probably.